All right, good morning. So we learned the Gemara related to URCHATZ and Karpas. We learned the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch related to URCHATZ and Karpas. Now the commentary of the Rebbe on the Haggadah. Hold on a second. So as we noted before, the Haggadah that the Rebbe comments on is the Alter Rebbe's Siddur. Like every good Siddur, it includes the liturgy for all year long, including the Seder night. That would be called the Haggadah. And like every good Siddur, it includes instructions. And the Rebbe's commentary on the Haggadah is on the text as the Alter Rebbe has it, with the Alter Rebbe's instructions as it appears in the Siddur. So let's start with above the line, which is that Siddur, that Haggadah. Above the line, on top, right, which says URCHATZ.
URCHATZ, yeah.
Above the line.
Okay, above the
URCHATZ. Top. So the first thing to note is that I mentioned this yesterday. The Alter Rebbe splits URCHATZ and Karpas into two different instructions. URCHATZ with an instruction, Karpas with the instruction, right? Mm-hmm. And this is significant. I mentioned this last year when we did our series on the Seder of the Seder, the order of the Seder. And there I noted that when it comes to Halal Nirtza, the Alter Rebbe puts them together. Halal Nirtza, two like bold titles, and then the text of Halal and the text of Nirtza. And Rebbe actually comments there and says, why did he put them together when seemingly Nirtza is in such a long time? It's all the way after all the Halal, then comes Nirtza. But yet in his instruction, the Alter Rebbe puts Halal and Nirtza together. Right?
What's the other one called?
Nirtza. Halal is the Halal that you say after benching. Yeah, and Nirtza, step number 15, is where you just say Lashon Haba Yerushalayim. Oh. And you drink the fourth cup. No, the fourth cup actually comes before that, at the end of Halal. So it's just Lashon Haba Yerushalayim. Nirtza means like comes from the term Ratzah and grace, Nirtza should be in God's grace. It's a prayer for the next year. Mm. So those two instructions, those two steps, titles, Alter Rebbe puts together Halal Nirtza, and then tells us the text Haggadah. So in theory, the Alter Rebbe could have done the same here. As I mentioned, the Rebbe on his commentary there asks, why is that? Leaves it unanswered, if I remember correctly. So here in theory, the Alter Rebbe could have done the same. He could have put URCHATZ Karpas together and then said, dip a vegetable, and because you're dipping a vegetable, therefore you shall wash first, which is the way it's laid out in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. In the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, we learned this yesterday, right? There's a long discussion on Karpas, and at the end, because you're dipping in, therefore you have to wash first. And the Gemara does the same thing. The Gemara first says Karpas, takes a detour to Koirach and other things, and then comes back and says, hey, by the way, since you're doing Karpas, you got to wash first. Because when you talk about URCHATZ and Karpas, not as an instruction, but as an idea, if you're learning about what Karpas and URCHATZ is, you would start with Karpas, dip vegetable. But because you're dipping vegetable, therefore you have to have a wash before. And therefore see the laws of washing your hands to see what to do. Right? But when you're giving instruction, like a Siddur, and it's not the place to start giving background and explanation, dip a vegetable. Oh, and because you're dipping a vegetable, wash first. I'm giving you an instruction manual. Like imagine you're given instructions to building a Lego, building a Lego right. Tower. My kids like to get these things, right? Yeah. So imagine the instruction began with, well, what you want is a full house. Because you have a full house, therefore now back up and do something else. The instruction manual gives you step by step, even though you have no idea what the steps are for. At the end, it'll emerge why you had all these steps. Right. So therefore, in the Siddur, we have to be giving you step by step. He tells you, URCHATZ, wash, Karpas, dip. Not giving you why you're doing that. But in the Shulchan Aruch, especially in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, which is all built on giving the reasons and the background, he starts out with Karpas and then tells you, by the way, since you're doing Karpas, you have to wash first. It's just like the Gemara does. Right. Whereas Rabbi Yosef makes sense, right? It follows.
They're not instructional.
That's correct. Nothing I'm saying is rocket scientist. I'm just saying this as opposed to, by the way, Rabbi Yosef's Cairo Shulchan Aruch, which does say wash first and then dip. It doesn't say dip, and because you're dipping, therefore wash first. Right? Because again, Rabbi Yosef Kairos there does not have all the background and reasons as the Alter Rebbe does. It's also more like an instruction manual.
Yeah.
The Rabbi Yosef Kairos Shulchan Aruch is written as an instruction manual. Do, don't do, don't do.
Right.
And then it's going to give you like the siddur here, point, wash, then dip. Without giving you the whole background. Okay, so now we're looking at our instruction manual, the siddur, the Haggadah. URCHATZ, you wash your hands. V'noitel yadav eina mevarech. And you wash your hands and you don't make a bracha. Right? We know this. And everybody doesn't comment on this. I'm actually surprised why everybody doesn't comment on this. Interesting. Okay, we don't make a bracha. Why? Because, okay, everybody's going to comment on it. Okay. You wash your hands and you do not make a bracha. That's the first instruction. Next instruction, karpas. Yeah. You take a vegetable less than a kazayas. Karpas of this vegetable called karpas. Right? We learned about that. The vegetable karpas is some vegetable that used to exist in Yerushalmi. In the Jerusalem Talmud, the Gemara mentions that it's a certain vegetable. And you dip it into salt water, or vinegar, and you make the following blessing. And then it says the blessing to make. Then it says, and you should have in mind, to exempt yourself from the bracha that you would have to make on the marar, but bracha zu, while making this bracha adam. Right? This is the sum total of the instruction based on all the background that we learned from Shulchan Aruch yesterday in the last few days. Now let's go below the line and see the Rebbe's comment, which is going to be, to a large degree, synthesizing for us that which we know from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. So on the right-hand side, in the bottom of the line, URCHATZ, and you shall watch. So in the italics, the Rebbe highlights the section of the Alter Rebbe's Haggadah that he's going to comment on, and here he's commenting on the instruction, which was, URCHATZ, and you shall wash, and you wash your hands, and you do not make a bracha. Why? Because one who wants to eat something that's dipped in liquid, which we're about to do in karpas, is required to wash his hands first. Citation, Psachim Kuftes Vav Aleph, our Gemara. After the Gemara finishes the discussion on kairach, this is the statement in the Gemara. That's a direct quote. You want to dip first, you have to wash first. Now you do so below bracha, you do so without making a bracha. Because when you're in doubt about whether you should make a bracha or not, you don't make a bracha. Why are we in doubt? So we touched on this a little bit, which is the mitzvah from our sages to wash before we eat bread is to remember the way in which people in temple times would have been concerned with purity and impurity. Now, the way the Gemara puts it is that this institution to wash your hands before you eat bread is true. That same institution is also true that you have to wash your hands before you eat anything that's wet.
And that's what they did.
Which,
presumably in temple.
Yes, because as I explained, because wet food or liquid is a very high transference. In fact, it can actually upgrade the level of impurity. So you have to wash your hands if you're touching something that is wet, because your hands, which are impure, would make the food impure, and then render, because it's liquidy, would then render your hand even more impure than it was before. So, however, there is a dispute. There's a dispute amongst the post-Talmudic sages as to what the meaning of the washing that one does, that the Gemara instructs to do before you eat something that's with liquid. Is it part of the same injunction to wash before you eat? In which case, you'd have to make a bracha and wash 3 times on the right and 3 times on the left. But Tosfos, if I remember correctly, says the washing your hands that the Gemara tells you to do before you eat a liquidy food is nothing to do with the mitzvah of remembering impurity and purity. It has to do with cleanliness. It's wet, and if your fingers are dirty, it'll make your fur dirty, and you'll end up eating that mud. So wash your hands first.
It's not a ritual.
If that's the case, not a ritual washing, and never no bracha. That's, if I remember correctly, it's Tosfos' view. And therefore, because we're in doubt as to whether this washing before you eat something that's wet, if it's a mitzvah washing or cleanliness washing, it's doubt because it's two different opinions in the post-Talmudic sages, different bracha, which means when our Gemara instructed before you dip, you should wash. It's possible that statement was made with the intent that you should make a bracha. If you're following the opinion that this is part of the ritual washing. But because we, in the post-Talmudic era, have an opinion that understands it differently, we don't make a bracha. Because of a doubt as to what that meant in the Gemara. Did the Gemara mean as a ritual washing and therefore bracha? Or did the Gemara mean a cleanliness washing and therefore no bracha? Because we're in doubt, no bracha.
The earlier sages were of the opinion that the washing was a ritual washing?
No.
No.
The Gemara just says to wash before you eat something.
Okay. There was no
Just
conclusion on
the Gemara doesn't say explicitly.
Okay.
Right? So the Gemara just says wash before you eat something that's dipped. No explicit instruction, no explicit explanation to why.
So therefore no bracha.
Right?
Because
The post-Talmudic sages, the Rishonim, dispute as to what the intention was when they said to wash before you dip.
so they're introducing the notion of
Because
intention.
Maybe you touch something.
Say it again.
They're introducing the notion of the reasoning and the intention behind the washing. In other words, it's the ritual washing. They're suggesting that it's not ritual washing.
Who's suggesting such a
The post-Talmudic.
It's machlekes.
It's a machlekes.
It's machlekes, and they're showing them as to what the intent is when it says to wash before you eat
They
something
don't
wet.
know whether it's ritual washing or
Yes, that's correct.
okay.
If you touch before, you wash before, you touch your nose, you have to wash again.
Here. Yeah, that's right. It's Tosus. Yeah, it's Tosus here on our page. He talks about Haggadah in which he saw that you should make a bracha here, and he thinks it's incorrect. It was not the first washing is not for.
Not for cleanliness.
That's right. It's for cleanliness, not for ritual purity.
Also, you wouldn't make.
It touches his view.
Yeah.
So that's the dispute here.
And
That's
who's
still-
the other view?
Rashi and most of the other halachic
Oh.
authorities.
Okay, so and
Because it's a dispute,
and
therefore-
the Rebbe is saying here
That because it's a
because
dispute,
it's a doubt, we don't
therefore no
make a
bracha. That's right. We are doubt as to which opinion is correct, as to what the intent of this washing is, or what the sage's intent was when they told you to wash this.
Citing the Gemara.
When the Gemara said to wash before you have something that's dipped, what did the Gemara mean? Machlekes. Did it mean ritual washing? Or did it mean cleanliness washing? If it's ritual washing, bracha. Cleanliness washing, no bracha. We're in doubt, no bracha. Okay. Now the Rebbe continues. I spoke about this last year also at length. This passage. What the Rebbe means here with this. He says like this. Even someone who is not particular to do this washing all year long. There are many relying on Tosfos, don't wash their hands before they eat something that's dipped. It's not really a ritual washing. You're not required to do it. It's just an issue of cleanliness or whatever.
Good practice, but
Yeah.
no.
So many, that's right. So many rely on Tosfos and don't do this washing all year long. Nonetheless, says the Rebbe, quoting from the Chok Yaakov, Natal Yodov, you should wash your hands tonight on the Seder. Why? This will be amongst many of the other distinct behaviors that we do in order to invoke curiosity from children. We spoke about this last year. The Rebbe seems to be combining two different opinions. On the one hand, you're washing because the halacha is you should wash all year long. But here he says, even if you're not washing all year long, you should still wash because that way it invokes questions from the children. So when I wash my hands before karpas, what's the reason for this washing? Well, it might depend on what I do all year long. If all year long I wash before I eat something that's wet, I'm doing it because that's the halacha. Okay, without a bracha because of that. If I don't wash all year long, I'm doing it because I'm trying to invoke questions from the children. What exactly is the meaning of the Rebbe's comment here? In combining these two seemingly odd opinions that are at odds, we spoke about it last year. Yeah.
But if you say that if it's something you're doing all year long,
And tonight you're doing it because
in that household,
it would exactly in that household it wouldn't invoke questions.
It backfires because
Correct.
that's not going to invoke any. So why would
Right.
you wash?
That's right. Sorry.
Why would you wash in that house?
To invoke questions. To invoke questions. Actually,
it wouldn't in that household because he does that. He always washes.
Right. So in that house, I'm doing it because that's the halacha. There are other opinions that actually say disagree with this Chok Yaakov. There are other opinions which say, there are other opinions that say, I think it's Taz, who says this fact that the Haggadah says wash before you eat the vegetable is like a rebuke of all you Jews who year long don't do this. In other words, the Taz is saying there's no issue here of raising curiosity. It's a halachic matter. And the fact that all year long you don't do it, that's your issue. Remember this from last year? No. We spoke about it. Anyway, but the Rebbe seems to be taking the other position, which is you should be doing it because that's the halachically correct. But if you don't, still do it because it invokes curiosity. Okay, we're not going to get into it, but that's here. We can look it up last year when we discussed the Seder of the Seder. I went through this. All right, now comes the next item, karpas. So again, in the italics, the Rebbe highlights the relevant section that he's commenting from the Rebbe, now the Rebbe, which is karpas, noitel, etc. What I'm curious about is why the Rebbe doesn't comment on the fact that it says vin noitel, and you wash your hands and make a bracha. Right? The title of this action is called URCHATZ, which begins with a vav, which means and you should wash. Yeah, which is itself a question. Why does it say URCHATZ and you shall wash? None of the other items say and. Kadesh URCHATZ is the only one that has a vav before us. URCHATZ. Karpas yachatz magid rasha moitzi matzah mara kerech shulchan aruch. That's something better. None of them say and.
Maybe it's an allusion to let people know that there is something that it's really secondary, but because of instructional purposes,
okay.
Put first.
Well, the problem with that is that you're putting the cart before the horse because the and
only
is coming before the primary. If that were correct, it would be karpas or chatz lefneze, not or chatz then karpas. Okay, we spoke about this a couple of years ago. The Rebbe's comment on this. The Rebbe first talks about the why it might be there because of the rhyme, rejects that, and concludes that there is a custom for many on Friday night that they wash and then make kiddush. So here's putting kaddish or chatz, make kiddush and then wash, and not the other way around, because other people have the custom to wash and then make kiddush.
Alluding to the kiddush that's before this.
Correct. So it's URCHATZ and kiddush and then wash, not wash and then kiddush as many do on Friday nights. Okay, but the Rebbe does not comment on the fact that the Alter Rebbe's instruction begins vin noitel yadav, and you shall wash your hands. But I guess the same answer applies. And you shall wash your hands rather than all the way around, rather than wash and then kiddush. Okay, let's continue. I want to finish this today so we can get to the Gemara tomorrow. I'm out of town, but we'll get back to the Gemara on Friday, B'ez Hashem. Okay, let's continue. So karpas noitel, the instruction is you have karpas noitel, you take the vegetable tipper, etc. Kedei latmiya atinoikos. The reason is to invoke curiosity from the children. Shein oisim kezabachayim basashana, because we do not do this all year long. Citation is our Gemara, Psachim Kuf Yud Daled. Yeah, we dip because we don't do this all year long. We explained it from Rashi because usually dipping comes later in the meal after you've already washed and had challah. Here we're dipping first, which is unusual, and thus it invokes curiosity. Okay, Pachis Mekazayas, we take less than a kazayas. Why? Because if the objective is not to eat a vegetable, if the requirement was to eat a vegetable, you'd have to eat a kazayas. Because halachic eating is only for kazayas. Less than a kazayas is not a halachic eating. But here the objective is not eating. Here the objective is to do the act of dipping and eat minimally just to invoke curiosity. Okay, so you can do less than a kazayas. That's enough to get the curiosity. You've got what you needed. And now that you've done that, you've satisfied the main issue here, which is to invoke curiosity. So then, don't eat more than kazayas, because then, according to all views, you will not be required to make a bracha afterward, bar nefashis rabbis, the after bracha of bar nefashis. We learned this in the Shulchan Aruch yesterday. One view is that the karpas is unconnected to the maror. And if the karpas is unconnected to the maror, then really, after you eat karpas, you should make a bracha achrona. But according to the other opinion, karpas is linked to the maror, and therefore you should not make a bracha achrona. So to avoid this doubt, we eat less than a kedayis. When you eat less than a kedayis, everybody agrees no bracha achrona. Right? This is what we said from the Shulchan Aruch. The Rebbe is synthesizing it here in one line. Yeah, clear? Then the yitbol you should dip. Again, there was citing to the Alter Rebbe yitbol, and only afterwards the yivareh shall you make the bracha. Don't make the bracha and then dip. Dip, then make the bracha. Why? I don't remember this in the Alter Shulchan Aruch. Do you? I don't think it's there because the Rebbe doesn't cite to it.
Why do you dip first before making the bracha?
Yes.
I don't.
Let's see. I don't think so either. But here the Rebbe says it. Kedei, in order litkoif habracha la'achila, in order to bring the bracha close to the eating, b'chol ma'da efsher, as much as possible. As much as possible, we avoid all interruption between the bracha and the act of eating, and therefore don't make that. If you make a bracha then dip, you're doing an unnecessary action that you could have done earlier.
You're interposing an action
between your bracha and your eating. You don't have to. You could have avoided it. What about the rest of it? What about all year long? All year long, we make a bracha mechala, and then we dip it in salt. Why is that? So explains the Rebbe. And that as for the fact that all year long, not just on Shabbos, but actually all year long, anytime. First you make hamoitzi, and only afterwards you dip in salt. If you were having challah on a Wednesday, should we do the same thing? What's the reason? Because in that instance, you have to make a bracha before you even cut the challah. So that you satisfy the halachic requirement to making a bracha on the large bread. Yeah, it's interesting. The Rebbe says you should make the bracha on the large bread. If I were doing this in depth, I would be unpacking this big time, because first of all, the Rebbe doesn't put the source here for this idea that all year long you're supposed to make the bracha on the big challah. Why doesn't he? It's all over the Shulchan Aruch. Number two, the Rebbe says you should be making the bracha on the big piece. Shouldn't you be making a bracha on the whole piece? You should say kadeshi varach ala shlema, but you want to make the bracha on the whole challah. Unless what that means here is, even on a Tuesday, if you were having a slice of bread, you should dip it into salt. Now you're not going to dip the whole slice of bread into the salt. You're going to rip off a piece and then dip it into the salt. But even there, you should be making the bracha before you rip off that piece, so that you make it on a bigger piece of bread, even if it's not whole. That's probably what the Rebbe is alluding to here. But again, if I were doing this in depth, we'd be unpacking all of this, but we're not, so we're going to go forward. Okay, the main malach u'b'chaymet, you should dip it into salt water or vinegar. Now you'll remember from the Alter Shulchan Aruch, he said salt water or vinegar or any other dip, because the point is to raise curiosity. So it could be any other dip besides for salt water or vinegar. But the Alter Rebbe says don't use charaisis, because you need that later for the maror, and you don't want to be dipping into maror later, having just dipped it into charaisis earlier. Although we look at the Gemara, it seems like if that's all you have, you might be able to do that. But ostensibly you shouldn't. So let's see. The Alter Rebbe says salt water and vinegar in the siddur. Doesn't say or anything else. Shulchan Aruch did say or anything else. So where does salt water and vinegar as a priority come from? Says the Rebbe, Toisvis de Brahamaskel Matabel. The Toisvis, which begins with the word Matabel, which is in our Gemara, Psochim Kufidalit. The Toisvis in our Gemara puts salt water and vinegar as your primary. So Kosvu, they in Toisvis write, Toisvis is a plural. It's a conglomerate, it's a school of thought, not just a person individually. We learned about them, we learned about the history of halacha, we learned about the Toisvis. Rashi's the school of Rashi's students and grandchildren. So they write, quote, b'chaymetz in vinegar, oy b'mei malach u'melach, or in water and salt. Oy b'mei melach, or water and salt. So they actually put vinegar as a first option, or salt water, or b'mayim u'melach, water and salt, as they call it. So they put actually vinegar as the first option. We, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, put salt water and then vinegar. Right? Salt water or vinegar. The Tosfos, which is the source, actually says the other way around: vinegar or salt water. Continues the Rebbe. But in the Siddur written by the Shalah, by Yeshaya Horowitz, and the Yavitz by Yaakov Emden, our friend from Altona, from the controversy. So in their Siddur, they write, quote, salt water or vinegar, putting salt water first. And presumably that's without Rebbe got this idea of putting salt water first because of these two Siddurim, the Shalah and the Yavitz. Yeah? Aval continues the Rebbe, don't dip into charoises. The Rebbe wrote this in the Shulchan Aruch as well. Why? Mitzvah, because when it comes to the second dipping by marar, the charoises is a mitzvah. In other words, the dipping now, the mitzvah is not what you dip into or what you dip in. The dipping, the mitzvah here is do a dipping for curiosity. Dip a seller into hummus. The hummus is kitnius, but we're not kitnius. We're in Gemara time before kitnius existed. Dip a seller into hummus.
Could it also be that chlorosis is not one of the 7 liquids?
It's not a question of, well, first of all, it is because there's wine in there.
For a different reason, though.
There's actually wine in there.
Why you wash.
Yeah, okay, but you know what?
Purpose of washing.
Okay, so then take washing out. In other words, as far as the halacha of the Gemara is concerned, take washing out if you can avoid it. What do we?
No, you could, but
Right? As long as you're doing a dipping to get the curiosity.
That may confuse people.
Again, we have a but we have a prepackaged, preordained, organized seder. But the Gemara is talking from the halachic perspective.
No,
it can be differently structured, right? So
I'm
take
just
out,
giving an alternate reason why you may not use.
So you're right. If you dip celery into hummus, you would not have to wash, and you'd still be satisfying the Gemara's requirement to have dipping to make a curiosity.
Yeah, sure.
Right, there you go. So you're right. But nonetheless, says the Rebbe, quote, taken from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, from earlier sources, not to dip into charoises. Because when you do the second dipping, over there, the second dipping is also for curiosity's sake, but there it's actually a mitzvah to eat charoises.
Right, you may not do it because if you already did it before.
That's right. And therefore, after having filled your stomach with it, with the charoises on your first dipping, mitzvah. Now you're going to do it for a mitzvah. Esmaha. This is like a curiosity. The source is the Rush. In other words, it would be like it's.
You're diluting
the precious of the mitzvah.
You weakened it.
You weakened it. It's not special anymore.
Yeah.
And therefore, don't do it by the don't. So even you can dip in whatever. Even though the Alter Rebbe here says salt, water, and vinegar. In the Shulchan Aruch he says or any other dip, but not charoises. So here the Alter Rebbe doesn't include the and not charoises instruction because he doesn't give you the alternative to do whatever you want. He says salt, water, vinegar, full stop.
Right.
So he doesn't have to add and not charoises.
Not a running commentary.
It's an instruction manual, and the instruction manual is salt, water, and vinegar. That's it. Yes, right. The question is why the Alter Rebbe did not here say or whatever else you want, which is true. It could be anything else you want, unless the Alter Rebbe is saying no, it has to be vinegar and salt water, and perhaps in the Siddur he's changing from his halachic view in the Shulchan Aruch, which is a possibility.
Maybe, like I mentioned, maybe it could be like one of those reasons about the washing.
He wants you to wash dafka. Maybe it's possible. Maybe he wants you to wash dafka, but that would still be a change from the Siddur to the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, he says, or anything else besides for charoises.
That would be a change.
In the Siddur, only says salt, water, and vinegar. Anyway, the Chabad custom is only salt water. Okay, conclude. Let's 2 more paragraphs. Let's finish it. Yechaven, top left. Yechaven, you should have in mind, right? When you make the bracha now, you should have in mind that you're good, that the bracha hadama being made on the karpas is covering the marar. Says the Rebbe first a grammatical comment. L'chora seemingly kain tzarich liyos b'shnei vavin. It should say yechaven with 2 vavs, v'lei vav yud, and rather than vav yud, which would be like yud chaf vav yud. And the same thing is true everywhere, where it's yechaven with 2 vavs. Okay, I'm not really sure. Okay, I guess in the Alter Rebbe Siddur it says yud chaf vav yud nun, and the Rebbe is commenting basically that it's probably a mistake by the printer to make the second vav into a yud rather than a vav, right? Yud chav vav vav long nun rather than yud chav vav yud nun. Probably. Okay. Now, as for the actual instruction, that was a grammatical comment and probably a comment on the misprint of the vav into a yud. Now, Yechaven Lahoitzi Gamas Amarar. We are told that you also have to cover, you have to have in mind, you make Hadama to cover the Marar as well. Why? Now that everybody's going to synthesize for us again, which we learned yesterday, which is Ki Ein Amiras Haggadah v'chulu, because the Haggadah does not const and everything else, the halal as well. It's not considered an interruption or a diversion of your attention from eating. That was the original opinion. Right? According to the other opinion, where it does constitute an interruption, it doesn't matter because then your matzah covers the marar. Right? But at least according to one opinion, your marar is not covered by your matzah, and therefore your marar has to be covered by your karpas. And in that opinion, that God is not an interruption, and therefore you should have in mind during the marar, during the karpas, to cover your marar of the hadama. Then the Rebbe adds, which is not in the Alter Shulchan Aruch, Machaven lahaitzi gam hamarar shel kairach. You should also have in mind to cover the marar that's in your sandwich. We're going to talk about this next Monday night when we discuss our kairach files part 2. The Rebbe adds here, you have to have in mind that not just the marar of the marar, but the marar of the kairach. Why is this such a chiddush? And we'll unpack this God next week. The marar that's in the sandwich, you could make the case that everybody agrees that that's secondary to covered by your bread, because you're eating with bread, you're eating with matzah. The maror, it's eaten alone. Maybe you can argue it's not part of your meal, and if we're not covered by the matzah, and therefore has to be covered by the maror. But the maror and the kairach seemingly
it has to be covered by the karpas.
Has to be covered by the karpas. But the maror and the kairach, you could make the argument it's with your bread. Of course, it's covered by the hamoitzi.
That's a second bread.
Why? Because we learned not that his opinion that what's the real reason for kairach to fulfill the mitzvah? What's the reason for the sandwich? Is to fulfill the mitzvah of maror according to Hillel, which means maror is the primary here. If anything, the matzah is secondary to the maror, not the other way around. If that's the case, then the maror does need to be covered by the adama of karpas, even in kairach. The question is, why is it not mentioned in the Alter Shulchan Aruch? Why is it not mentioned in the Alter Shulchan Aruch? Good question. We'll have to think about it. Maybe when we unpack it in the kairach files, we'll see. Perhaps. Okay. Continuing. B'karpas loitzian im yechlen. We learned this once before, by the way. This little paragraph, we learned it when we talked about the mitzvah of leaning. We learned this section, but we'll read it again because we're here. B'karpas loitzian im yechlen b'seba Levi seba. Here, the Alter Rebbe does not note whether you should be leaning when you eat the karpas or not. Kamoshe kosev b'marar, as he does by the mitzvah of marar, where he says, "Do not lean because you're eating marar." But when it comes to karpas, the Alter Rebbe is silent. Do you lean or not lean?
You don't lean marar?
No, marar you don't lean. It's bitter. We lean by matzah and wine, right? So the Rebbe explains
So then
why is he not commenting one way or the other on karpas?
Well, if you're not leaning from marar, then by extension, then
Why?
do you not lean?
Karpas nothing to do with bitterness. Remember, we looked in the Rebbe Sicha. The mitzvah of leaning could extend to the whole night.
Yeah. Okay, that's
The mitzvah of leaning is for the whole night.
bitterness.
Right, marar is bitterness, but the mitzvah of leaning is for the whole night. Many of we learned this from Rebbe's father, right? He used to lean by a cigarette. So why not lean? So why not lean by karpas? Or at least tell us what we should do. Don't lean or yes lean.
It's optional.
So says the Rebbe, we might suggest the dinoi, the law here with respect to karpas and leaning, is equal to all other food items you eat that night during your meal, your chicken, your soup. It's your choice. If you want to not lean, and one who leans, that's praiseworthy.
Yeah.
Like the guy leaning during the cigarette, even though.
Option.
Yeah, now it continues. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe in his instruction manual, namely the Siddur, will only tell you when it's absolute yes or absolute no. When it's optional, he's silent.
That's a good reason.
That's right. But now, what's our Chabad custom? Our custom is we don't lean by the optional parts. Even though the Rebbe's father did lean by the optional parts, our Chabad custom is not to lean by the optional parts, and therefore we don't lean by the karpas. Continuing, final comment. According to most opinions, karpas ain't tzarich haseh, but the karpas does not require leaning. Finally, la'achar karpas, after the karpas, I haven't seen machzirin hanishar that people put the rest of your vegetable back ala kaira on the seder plate.
Leftover
Leftover of your karpas. When it comes to, for example, the chareses, people do. You don't, when you're done with the charesis, you still might leave it on because the presence of the charesis itself serves as a reminder for the bricks and mortar, not just the dipping part of it, not just the eating part of it, but even its presence. If we were doing a class on charesis, which is a fascinating subject, we will talk about that. That the presence of the charesis itself, just like the presence of the beitza, is there to remind us of the Haggadah. The presence of the Zuriya is there to remind us of the Pesach. Even though you're not eating it, our custom is to eat the egg. But you don't have to eat the egg.
You don't need to remember the curiosity. It's already been done.
Exactly. And if when it comes to the karpas, says Rebbe, I haven't seen anybody put it back. And therefore, from now going forward, you're left with only 5 things on your Seder plate. Now, when Rebbe says I haven't seen, what does it mean that which Seder did Rebbe attend that he's saying I haven't seen?
The ones he most likely the ones he's referred to in the previous issue.
Which would mean his father-in-law's table and probably his father's table also. No, Rebbe was never at Rabbi Levi Seder.
No, but he had.
Oh, yes. He's not saying, I have.
Is that what you meant?
Oh, maybe he says I didn't see it written somewhere. Okay, that could be. It could be I haven't seen it written somewhere. It's also possible I haven't seen it practiced. I haven't seen it practiced that they put it back.
Okay.
And I think that's what he means. I haven't seen it practiced.
Makes sense because you said that he used to inquire about practices of other regions.
Correct. The Rebbe was a collator of Chabad Minhag, big time collator of Chabad Minhag.
Right.
We see it all over Rebbe's letters, especially in the early years. They were sending letters to older Hasidim, Rabbi Yaakov Landa, most notably, chief rabbi of Bnei Brak, who was earlier the chief rabbi in Lubavitch in Russia. And they used to ask him what was the custom back in the day. And here they were saying, I haven't seen anyone say to put it back. I haven't seen anyone do it. Presumably, the Seder that he attended, where he observes, would be his father-in-law's table, where sometimes the Rebbe says, the minhag in my father-in-law's house is to do X. That we'll put that in his commentary. And here he says, I haven't seen it, means I haven't seen my father-in-law do it, the previous Rebbe. And nor did he see his father, presumably. Otherwise, he would say, I saw some people do it. Right? So, in whatever Seder the Rebbe attended, or the books he read, or the information he's collecting, he hasn't seen any instruction to put the rest of the leftover of your karpas back, because you're only eating kizayas, right? And
what the rabbanim about
and therefore at this point going forward, there's only 5 items left. Yeah,
the rabbanim from the Middle East or Arabic country, the Sephardim, they don't follow the
Okay,
Rabbi.
so?
we have
sure. So
we follow what Hashem said on the law. You have to follow that.
okay,
But if you make division, instead to be together, you have to be careful.
okay, all right. Have a wonderful day, Eden, and we'll pick up God willing on Friday morning.
Like this.
Thank you very much.
Friday morning is finished.
I'm not going to be here tomorrow, so that Friday morning will continue.
Okay.
We'll go back to the Gemara, which is going to discuss the law of the person who swallowed matzah or swallowed maror without chewing it, and whether he fulfills his obligation or not. We'll get there. We have lots more to go. We're going to be learning about the Seder night well after the Seder.
Cliffhanger now.
Yeah, you have a good day, Eden.